Okay, guys, thanks for bearing with us. Can y'all hear me okay? Good? All right, I'm a walker, but I'm hooked up. All right, just for a quick show of hands, how many first-timers? Okay, a lot of first-timers, awesome. And then how many people are healthcare providers? Okay, cool. And then admin, I'm assuming, okay, great. Well, glad you're here. My name is Jonathan Wilson. I'm a family doctor. I'm kind of straddling the line of admin and clinical. And I definitely do not have it together, as is my PowerPoint. Was that ever up? Okay, never mind. They just went running. Okay. This is part of hazing these students. You know, you got to get them running around. Okay, just a little bit. Sometimes I find it helpful when the speaker gives you a little background. So I'm going to do that. I hope it's not, you're like, I don't really care about your life. But I grew up in Augusta, Georgia. I'm one of 5 boys. My parents, strong faith in the Lord, kind of grew up in Southern Christianity, if you will. And kind of my first taste of my faith kind of meeting people in the margins was I was in elementary school, and my mom was helping out at the school, and there was this young guy named Frankie Coe, and he lived in a trailer park. His aunts took care of him. She smoked in the house, so he just smelled like cigarette smoke. He had dirty, long fingernails, and my mom was assigned to help him with his reading. And so Frankie started coming to our house. He started coming to church with us, and we went to like a, little kids wearing blazers to church kind of church, And so Frankie did not fit in, and Frankie always sat next to me. And I had a decision of like, man, Frankie is not helping me look cool around here. But kind of realizing as like reading the Bible of like, man, God, I'm good. Yep. Sorry. God really cares about Frankie, and maybe part of his teaching me about himself is getting to know and love Frankie. And Frankie was a great part of our family. And that really kind of got me on my journey of kind of this upside down kingdom that CCHF is all about. I went to Covenant College, which is a small Christian school. I'd gone to public school all the way through, and studied economics and community development. I don't know, have any of y'all read When Helping Hurts? Those guys were my professors. And so really just got immersed in this idea of like, Rick talked about it this morning, right? Like we care about telling people about Jesus, but we also care about all the social, we care about their lives. And so how do we do both of those? And so that was another step in that journey. I had no idea what I should do after college. I lived in the inner city for a bit and coached basketball. I tried to teach school. I joke all the time. By the time I taught school, coached, prepared a lesson, it was way harder than med school ever was. And so ended up God opening some doors of medicine. And I know that you guys have heard about John Perkins, but man, I got to spend some time with him at Katrina, and then I went on a motorcycle trip after college, and we slept on his living room floor for 3 or 4 days and just got to soak in. And one of the things I just, he was living out his faith in such a real way. And I mean, and it was just funny. I remember one of the things we were asking him about marriage, and he had been married to his wife, Vera Mae, for like 70 years. And we were asking about, he's like, me and Vera Mae, we've only had one fight. He's like, we put it to bed every night and we wake it up every morning. And I just appreciated, this was such a godly man, but just real about life and marriage and all of that. And then as a student and resident, got to go to Memphis and work with a lot of these clinics, got to go to Jellicoe, Tennessee. So I'd encourage you, if you're a student, to do some rotations, to immerse yourself, see all these different styles of people doing it, because there's sometimes you can come to this and feel so overwhelmed of like, gosh, there's these huge clinics and there's this little clinic, and where do I fit in all this? And just trusting that God's got you where he wants you, that you're on an adventure with him, and that he's guiding you. And there's going to be dysfunction, there's going to be transition, but that he is in all of that. There's just a picture of my crew. I've got Oak, Sedley, Rhodes, and Gus, and my wife Ingrid, and we love the outdoors, so got to show them some love. Okay, let's get into this. Here's where we're going. We're going to talk about whole person care, how we think of it. We don't have the corner on the market, but we're going to go through the physical, mental, social, and the spiritual, and then conclude. So I get the privilege of working at the Hope Community Clinic. We've had a story. We were partnered with a football player in Charlotte for a while. Things happened. We got kicked out of that building. We're operating out of a makeshift clinic, and then through COVID, got a lot of funding. We're able to buy this like 10,000 square foot building and are there now. We're actually partnering with a dental school, about to have dental being provided, so that's exciting. But our mission is, we believe that Christ's love compels us to change the world and serve our neighbors. And then our vision is to restore hope and wholeness to marginalized neighbors by delivering exceptional integrated care. We provide comprehensive medical care paired with trauma-informed mental health services with a focus on the immigrant and refugee community. And then, so I'm going to go over the physical, and I've got my colleagues going over. And Mark Landon's actually in the house, so he's going to come up for that piece of things. But I will just say, what a privilege it is to get to work with. I learned so much about what it means to walk with Jesus from my patients who've been through. I've lived such a privileged life, and folks who have fled terrible situations and still have a faith and a joy and a hope. It's been life-changing for me. Okay, so whole person care. This is kind of how I think about it when I'm talking through with a patient. I say, all right, let's talk about your physical, then we're going to address your mental, your social, and your spiritual. Okay, so physical. This is kind of how I think about it. So we talk about diet. I have found these very helpful. This is from the old ways, but it's culturally appropriate kind of Mediterranean diet, if you will. So we have these up in our room. So if you're struggling with a resource, I like that it's pictures. You probably know all this stuff, but it's this is not the food pyramid we grew up with, right? This is lots of fruits and vegetables at the bottom, fish and seafood, right? Less dairy, less red meats. We've even got a little bit of cerveza, and so it looks like some sangria up there. So, take that what you will. The part I do love at the bottom is it talks about eating in community, that when we eat with other people, we typically eat slower, we eat less, and it's just good for us. And so, in America, we're talking about this, like my Honda Odyssey has like 18 cup holders because like America, we just drive around and eat, right? Probably weren't designed to do that. So I do try to bring that up. Okay. Secondly, exercise, self-explanatory. We talk about exercise. Substance use, the old joke is however many beers they say, you just multiply it by 2. I should stomp. That's where you're supposed to laugh on that. Okay. All right. Screenings. We have, and this is, we're in the process of re-upping, but Cologuard, we typically do fit testing just because it's cheap and easy, but Cologuard does have a program that you can apply to where they'll send you 10 boxes a month. And that's nice just because it is this, DNA testing. It's good for 3 years, so it does help with your metrics. So if you're looking at that, PAP with HPV testing, nice thing about adding that HPV, right, is you can do them every 5 years if all that's negative. We've got a partnership with LabCorp where we get discounted labs. So if you're in this process, that has been great. And then we've partnered with Novant Health. They actually pay me to be at the Hope Clinic, but they provide our EMR, which is Epic. So if you can get in with your local health system and say, hey, and we've got a dashboard proving, hey, when somebody establishes with us, they're, 50% less likely to use the ED, 50% drop in readmissions. You're paying for these patients, right? One way or another. Why don't we get them an appropriate venue of care? And so Epic's been really helpful to be able to track that stuff and be able to see, okay, when they go to the emergency department, here's what happened, and all that stuff. And then I was just going to put in a plug for point of care ultrasound for those of you guys that are training. If you can get that, that is super helpful for a lot of different reasons, but it's really hard to get X-rays and MRIs and CT scans. So if you've got that skill, we've got a provider that comes in and does that for us, and that's amazing because it's no transportation, right? They're there, you get it done. So, all right, so that's kind of our physical. Mental health wise, we've got the privilege of having, we do as many counseling appointments as medical. We know that part of trauma is that when you've had a lot of trauma, right, you get in that sympathetic mode, that fight or flight more often. And when you live in that leads to higher cortisol levels, right, which leads to more diabetes, more hypertension, those sorts of things. And so we really value having that therapy side of things. And I will say, culturally, a lot of our patients from all over the world, there's not even really language for anxiety, depression. So sometimes it's just explaining like, hey, this is what your body's doing. This isn't, when your heart's beating fast and your palms are sweaty, this is not your heart, right? This is you're not having a heart attack. This is your brain. This is what trauma does. So I feel like I spend a lot of time kind of educating patients on, and it's okay to admit that we have anxiety, that we have depression. And so this is Mary Beth. She's going to kind of explain how we do our IBH.
First of all, I have helped develop our screening process and help to run and implement that. So as far as mental health, for annual and well visits, we always want to screen for mental health. For adults, we do the PHQ-9 and the GAD-7 every time. And then for kids, we have some different screenings we do based on their age. For teenagers, we always do the PHQ-9 to get a reading for depression. I believe that's really important to do for teenagers. We also do PEARLS and then the PSC-17 youth version, so they fill that out for themselves. For kids that are 6 to 11, we do the PEARLS screener and then also the PSC-17 that their parents fill out. For kids that are infants up to age 5, we do the PEARLS and we do the SWIC. And those help us really get just kind of an idea of what's going on with each patient. In addition to that, whenever we have a patient coming in that has a history of mental health problems or has spoken with one of us in the past about mental health issues, I make sure that we go ahead and do a PHQ-9 and GAD-7 for them at that time too, just to check in and see how things are doing. As the IVH provider, I will go into the medical appointment, usually after the doctor or other provider has gone in, and I will talk to a patient about how they're doing mentally. We will talk about stress, about depression, about anxiety. Hopefully I've already seen their screener, and so I have some idea of what their scores are and how they're doing. And at that point, I am assessing the patient to see what kind of needs they have. Would they be a good candidate to be added to our wait list to be seen by a therapist regularly? Or can I do a short-term intervention with them right there in the appointment that would help them, give them some tools to use as they leave? And so sometimes it's one or both of those or a mixture of some kind. I do some CBT interventions. I also have done some recent traumatic event EMDR interventions right in the medical appointment. And when that's appropriate, that's something that's really helpful for me to do. And then I'll also provide them with psychoeducation about depression or anxiety or stress, about coping. We will practice things like deep breathing and butterfly taps. And then I'll communicate with the provider about how they're doing. Sometimes we talk about medication and I can give my opinion. And then I also can provide that psychoeducation with the patient if they decide to take some medication to address the depression or the anxiety or whatever. We also do a lot of psychoeducation about trauma in our IDH program. And a lot of times this is the first time that a patient has really heard about trauma. And so they're just beginning to understand how it may be impacting their life. And so this is kind of a way that we introduce our patients to this understanding. And then other than that, sometimes I kind of play the go-between between the medical provider and the behavioral health therapist that the patient might be seeing, and help coordinate things between the two of them and just make sure that the patient is getting all of their needs covered. Thank you.
Okay. EMDR, anybody familiar with that? A few. So eye motion desensitization reprocessing. It sounds kind of like voodoo, but you're talking through your trauma while either moving your eyes or hands. And there's something about how the brain, as it's talking, kind of using right brain, left brain, can compartmentalize that trauma so that it's not constantly flooding you when you're triggered. And so I've seen people come off their antidepressants, off their blood pressure medication after doing that. So if you do have a therapist and they haven't had that training, it's not for everybody, but it is a pretty powerful modality that I was unaware of until a couple years ago. But very fortunate to have Mary Beth and her team to be able to do that. And this model was started by a group called Cherokee Health there in the Appalachian area. And basically they had a therapist come in with every appointment. And what they found was, like, most medical noncompliance is behavioral, right? I mean, it's sometimes it's just financial or whatever, but like this piece is so important. We know that, and I'll move over to the social part, right? We know that the social determinants of health are 80% of what matters. So me as the clinician having access to me is 20% of what matters. Kind of puts my work in perspective, right? So your access to housing, your access to good education, good food, all that kind of stuff is so essential. I'm going to let Gabby take it away on how we address the social.
Social worker at Hope Community Clinic. And so with that title comes a lot of different responsibilities and experiences, and I'm so happy to be sharing them with you today. So as a lead social worker, I am kind of the point person for when people are interested in either medical care or behavioral health care. And so I assist people with getting connected to our services by going through an application process with them and an intake process. And in that intake process is where the magic begins. So we start with understanding what are the social drivers of health that are impacting this person. So that is anything from food insecurity to transportation issues, housing stability, difficulty with financial resources, social connections, stress, etc. All these little aspects of life that you don't really think of when you go to a doctor's appointment, but really determine what happens after that 20 minutes with your provider. And so our team, we have a case manager and a community health worker and myself. We all work together to get that information on the front end, to understand this is the context that this person is living in. So then as they come in to establish care with the provider, the provider is aware of the experiences and sometimes even the patient's willingness to adhere to certain medical treatments or ability to obtain certain resources. And so that is a lot of the focus of the work that we do. It's not only understanding the barriers, but also addressing them, creating bridges in those gaps of care so that people can receive quality care from their providers. And so aside from that, we also are on call for our providers to assist them with those same social determinants of health needs. So let's say a patient comes in for a follow-up on their diabetes and we find out, hey, they're having a lot of trouble obtaining their medication because they lost their job. And so that's when we say, oh, you would definitely qualify for this assistance program that gets you your medication delivered to your house for free. So we jump in right there in their visit, and we help them fill out these documents. We advocate for them, and we get them connected to that resource. Same if they need a specialty care appointment. We'll collaborate with our referral coordinators to get them access to that program, help them apply for that program, just to make sure that they are getting access to a healthcare system that is not often designed for them. And of course, there's always food insecurity. For example, you are a patient with diabetes, you don't have access to nutritious food, and that therefore impacts the diet portion of your treatment. And so addressing those needs, making sure they have fresh food, meat, vegetables, eggs, all of these things that can be really good for that healing process for the patient. We work hard to make sure that they have access to those things, and more than anything, make sure that they have community and that they have a connection to others that care for them aside from their medical team. And so that's just a little bit of what we do. If mental health or stress needs come up as well, we'll collaborate with Mary Beth, our integrated behavioral health provider, to make sure that those needs are also being addressed, and we're connecting them to the appropriate person to care for their heart and their mind as well. And so, yeah, love what we do, and I hope we get to do it for a really long time. Thanks.
All right. I always joke that you got to be really organized to be poor, because every time you go anywhere, you got to fill out another application and another bank statement and your employer and blah, blah, blah. So our social workers really do a great job of, okay, you got your application here. We know you need MedAssist. We know you need specialty care. We're going to knock out all these applications so that your barriers to care are eliminated. I am trying to get something in Charlotte going where it's one application for them all and you're good for a year. I'm not going to hold my breath, but I would love that. The other thing I'd mention is, and Mark does a great job of this, of interacting with our churches. A lot of us are bridges. We are the proximity bridges to the poor in our communities, right? Like, you are doing this work. Maybe a lot of the people you go to church with just work a normal job, right? And do not have this sort of access. And so I do think addressing some of these social needs is a way people can get involved. So Mark's done a great job of helping recruit churches to bring in food baskets. I mean, that's an easy thing. Okay, can y'all bring 20 this week? We will hand them out, or, just getting creative around these social needs, I think, is an opportunity to be a bridge. All right. And then lastly is the spiritual. What do you think? You want me to play this and see what you say? Okay. All right. And let me just say this. When I'm in the visit, and this is more for you providers, I'll just say, hey, we've talked about your physical, we've talked about your mental, we've talked about your social. Do you find any strength in the spiritual? And there's lectures on how to take a spiritual history. This is just how I do it. And I just say, what you believe about why you're here matters. And that helps me know. And then we just kind of hopefully launch into a conversation from there. And a lot of times it's great. And sometimes people have a lot of church hurt or some spiritual abuse that's happened in their past. And I'll say, hey, there's this amazing guy, Mark, you should keep this conversation going. And that's typically what I end up referring, but let me have him talk about how we address the spiritual.
I'm Mark Landon, family advocate at Hope Community Clinic. I play a few different roles here at HCC. One of the main roles that I play is spiritual care. So whenever a provider or a counselor is in conversation with a patient or client and they realize that they might need to have conversations around spiritual issues, they make a referral to me. People are very complex with complex stories, and spirituality is almost always a part of that. So the first time I ever heard anybody talk about spirituality as a part of integrated care was when Dr. Wilson would talk about whole person care. And I became excited to imagine what that could look like for people to heal holistically, with spirituality being a part of that. One's faith can be a source of great encouragement, strength, solace, and we want to incorporate those things into the conversation. A person's spiritual journey can be deeply restorative for them, especially as we attend to the hard questions that inevitably arise, because there's always those hard questions. When I began this role at Hope, most of my life at this point had been ministry, youth ministry, church ministry. And I was reticent to get involved with healthcare because I didn't see that opportunity to talk about spiritual things. But when we think about integrated care, we have an opportunity to talk about everything a person needs. And spirituality is a key part of that. We believe that every person's journey is sacred, and we want to honor and respect that wherever they are in their journey, their religious journey, their cultural journey, and we honor that. But we also want to look for ways to engage in conversations around who Jesus is and what he offers us, because we believe that he really does offer hope. Everything we do is as trauma-informed as possible. That comes into even how we have our spiritual conversations. We know that some of our families have experienced religious abuse and trauma, and we want to be respectful of those things. We also want to be willing to walk with them and to dive into the hard questions. People often wonder where God is when they've been through these hard things, or they've been hurt by the church or by people with religious authority. So we do that with our patients and clients, but we also do that with our staff. Our staff are very diverse in their spiritual walks, and we want to also honor and respect that and engage people where they are. We want to walk alongside people where they are and to never put pressure. We want to offer everything in an open-handed way. So we do some of that through regular daily devotions that are offered and through monthly soul care. And in everything we do, we want to integrate faith, and we want that to be more than just stamping Jesus' name on everything. Jesus is often used by people with all kinds of different agendas, and so we want to avoid that, and we actually want to offer simply who Jesus is. Jesus is a person who's full of the fruit of the Spirit. He's the example of that for us, full of love and joy and peace and patience and kindness and goodness and gentleness and faithfulness and self-control. And so that's what we want to offer people, whether they're people on the team, on their journeys, or the people that we serve, the families that we serve. We want to offer that Jesus who is full of the fruit of the Spirit. And as we do, we're just willing to walk into the dark places with people where they have pain in their spiritual journey and where they have unanswered questions, and we sit with them and we help them to move forward. We help people as they discern what their spiritual longings and yearnings are, and we bring Jesus into the equation, but gently. And as we do those things, we hope that we will offer hope. And that pun is intended because we are Hope Community Clinic. Thank you.
Love it. You had some follow-up thoughts?
Man, that guy was bored. I'm so sorry. All right, we'll stand together. So a couple things. I mean, just one. I mean, we've already sort of talked about it, but just to say it out loud, like whole person care is more complicated. It is more difficult, and yet what we will find is if we can do that kind of work, we will have better outcomes for our patients, and that means health ultimately. And so, so long, I think, the years past, 20, 30 years ago, the spirituality was kind of pulled out of so much of society. And so for us to have that as a tool again is a really powerful tool to have again. The one thing I would say is in doing whole person care, and I bug Jonathan all the time, but sometimes it requires just a little bit of slowing down. But even, I just sat in a session about like, how do you do that in 15 minutes? Because that's really hard. But some of the slowing down, even in the 15 minutes, is what you do as you go in. Do you kind of calm yourself? Do you kind of say like, I heard a story about a doctor who just puts his hand on the door before he goes in and just says a quick prayer, like, Jesus, go with me, help me be attentive. I think there's lots of little ways that we can prep ourselves. But a team is so helpful. And I know that not all of you are in a team setting, but one of the beauties of our team setting is that our providers can look at their schedule and they can actually say, oh, oh, Joanna's coming and she's going to have a lot of questions, and maybe some of those are going to be faith questions. And so they can cue me to go in and have and sort of have a conversation about like where are you spiritually today? Is there something going on with you? Like, is there something you would like help with? And we kind of know where people are. So sometimes we can, by looking ahead at schedules, we can know and we can be ahead of the game. A lot of times it's just like, hey, Mark, would you come talk to this person? Sometimes it's really interactions. I mean, a lot of these families I've been working with since about 2016. So I'll see them in the parking lot or in the lobby and the conversations happen there. I think one of the next level things for us is we would like to get to where we train church partners to actually come in and be available, almost like a chapel during the day, where if somebody came in and there was something really heavy with them, they could just spend some time attending in prayer. But the picture, and I'm going to use it I didn't know I was doing this talk today. So I'm doing another talk tomorrow, and I'm going to be talking about the picture of the paralytic, Mark and Mark 2, where the four guys take the paralytic to Jesus. And I think that's the picture I want to leave you with, because I think if we're thinking about the spiritual piece and really whole person care in general, but particularly the spiritual piece, what we're saying is we're going to pick up our friends and we're going to carry them. Like, there's an intentionality to that. And I think more than anything else, that intentionality piece matters, so that whatever you choose to step into, you will do it on a regular basis. And so even if it's that moment of hand on the door, Jesus, help me guide this conversation, let me be attentive. If that's all it is, that's transformational when you think about it. So intentionality to get there, and then a commitment to stay with it. Sometimes it's going to make your appointment go longer. Sometimes we're going to have to encourage follow-up. Now, we have a team for that. I know some of you don't, but maybe that's where you look for more church partnerships. And that's something, if you have questions about that, I can chat with you about later. But you first you intend, and then you commit to the work. You get through that roof, you get them to Jesus, and you let Jesus do the work. And we believe, if we're believers, that Jesus is always doing the work. And so some of it is we just have to show up. So leave that picture in your mind as like, we're going to do this. We're going to commit to it. We're going to let it sometimes be awkward, and we're going to expect Jesus to show up. And then what we find, if we're honest, as we're doing this kind of work, we're going to find that we are actually not the ones carrying people to Jesus. They are actually the ones carrying us to him. Yeah, that's all I got to say. Thank you.
Awesome. Let's give it up for Mark. Yeah, and I mean, Mark is a luxury to have at a clinic. Before that, we had a couple Latino pastors, a couple other pastors in the community that were willing, if somebody had a need, that we could connect them. So that's just, if you don't have that luxury, an option. This is just a handout that I give to a lot of patients. It's got some spiritual disciplines. So Lectio Divina is a way to kind of meditatively read through the scripture. And then prayer of examen. Ignatius, who's kind of the father of the spiritual discipline, said, if you had to only do one spiritual discipline, this would be the one. I try to do this every night, and it's just pray through my day, kind of examine the day, thank God for the good things. We know gratitude lowers our stress levels, right? Ask forgiveness for anything I need to ask forgiveness for, and this idea of kind of giving whatever I'm worried about over. And I often fall asleep doing it. But I've got that in Spanish and English. Happy to give that to you guys if you'd like to use it. I've got it like plugged in my EMR, so I can just click on it and add it to their after visit summary. Okay, that's really it. Let me, before I go to that, any questions, or I'd love even what you're doing that sounds like it's different or better than what we're doing, because we don't have the corner on the market. Yeah.
We're a small clinic in Midlands, Indiana.
Okay.
But we have every patient goes through our spiritual care team.
Oh, wow.
They do not leave with that. That is just one step. They come in, they see the receptionist, and they go to the desk and see what that. And then spiritual care is one of our steps. We always, every patient goes through.
Amazing. Okay. Just to
Yeah. Give out Bibles and our spiritual care is some of the bigger anywhere. But
yeah, that's amazing. Yeah. We are. Mm-hmm.
So I was wondering, you have a lot of volunteers, and how long is your appointment? We have big models, like we have medical, dental, behavioral, basically we can be over and like $1,600 a year.
Oh my gosh.
I think what we're trying to do, because we have so many people in the total,
Yeah.
like, we kind of have the different people. We have sort of a mixture between referrals and like come in during the patient appointment and rotation.
Yeah.
But so many people. So my question is like, how long is your patient appointment? Is it structured or is every model different?
Yeah. Yeah. Good question. The question is, how do we structure the visit? So everybody does an intake as a patient when they first come in, right? And that's where we get all the kind of social stuff. Yeah, and that's just the intake before you even join our clinic. And then typically it's kind of like a normal office visit. I do every 20 minutes. We have other providers do every 30 minutes. And some like our IBH has looked over and flagged, okay, we want to do PHQ-9 GAD7 for this one. They've got a diagnosis or talked to them last time. Some of them we already know need social work, but I would say typically we see them medically and then those other pieces happen after, and then we kind of keep, as the medical provider, keep going down. We're kind of first line and from there, if that makes sense. Yes. Yeah. Yes.
So one of the persons of family medicine is trying to do everything.
Yeah.
Which is why we got into it.
Yeah.
We like that. I'm curious how you think about where your limit as a critic is in these four domains versus when you're looking at community.
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, we want to try to do everything, right? And you can't do everything. How do you do that? We're definitely still figuring that out. I think for me, and I'm encouraging some of my other providers to do this, like, hey, you do what you can do medically, right? And let's connect them to services. And then let's let our IBH team and let's let our social work team do their thing and connect them. And everybody's got their limits, and those limits are okay. I think we're trying to be that bridge to those other organizations and trying to make that transition as easy as we can. And we've had to say no to doing some things because if we can't do it well, we don't want to do it. So we don't have it figured out, and it's still a challenge. And I think we're hopeful that the right people show up to do the biggest needs, if that makes sense. Yep.
So I started a couple of PhDs now practice.
Okay. Yeah, that's a great question. Part of it depends on your process, right? So when people come in, what are the questions are your MA is asking? So you can get a lot of that social determinants of health stuff out of the way by that, or a quick handout. AI has been a game changer for me. I had a buddy come in who I'd seen the year before, and it was like my quick dragon note that was like, his HPI was like 3 sentences of, he's doing fine. And then he came back and he's like, my sex life was in there and my spiritual and all that, like, what's going on? I was like, well, AI's listening. So AI has been helpful because it is going to write a ton of detail on all that. So that's a double-edged sword, though. Some of the stuff you may not want in there. Yeah.
I think it's going to be really hard to do the whole one. That's why.
Yeah.
How are you guys?
We are funded a lot through private donations, grants, and we're actually visiting some friends in Raleigh to see about doing like the FQHC lookalike. But yeah. No. Yeah. And we do ask for an optional donation from our patients, $30 an appointment. And so that brings in some revenue as well. All right. I got last slide here. This is just a shameless plug. One of my buddies, we actually named our kid after one of them, Rhodes, is writing a book on politics that's coming out. So just a plug for that. And then this other guy's become my favorite author. And I'm just going to read a little vignette here just to close us because I think it's the work we do. This is called The Final Frontier. It's by Brian Doyle. It says, "It is the rare soul who remembers particular lines from Scripture for reasons other than professional advancement or private absorption. But I remember even as a child being totally riveted by certain odder, blunter, saltier lines that made me elbow my wry, patient dad, like, 'Be kind to your father even when his mind goes,' or the ones where Christ isn't so much God-like as he is a rattled guy, such as when he whirls and shouts, 'Who touched my clothes?' and he felt the power leave him." What a phrase. One of those lines for me has always been, "Blessed are the poor in spirit." I heard it for the first time as a child, of course, at Mass, late in the morning, drowsing between my alpine dad and my willowy mother, in a pew filled with brothers seated with parental buffers so as to reduce fisticuffery, and like everyone else, I was puzzled and nonplussed. Wasn't the whole point to be rich in spirit? How could you be riffed spirit-wise but get a backstage pass to the kingdom of heaven? What was that about? Was it a major, serious printer's error no one had noticed all these years? Was it supposed to be pair in spirit or something artsy like that? Diligent school teachers subsequently explained this phrase to me, and my wise, gentle parents explained it, and learned university professors explained it, and able scholarly writers explained it. And I got the general idea that the word poor that is better understood as humble. But humble never really registered for me because I was not humble. And I had no real concept of humble until my wife married me, which taught me a shocking amount about humility. Graced by children, which taught me a stunning amount about humility. And then friends of mine began to wither and shrivel and die in all sorts of ways, including being roasted to death on September 11th. And I began slowly and dimly to realize that humbly was the only finally, truly honest way to be in this life. Anything else is ultimately cocky, which is either foolish or a deliberate disguise you refuse to remove for complicated reasons, perhaps not known even to you. Of course, you do your absolute best to find and hone and wield your divine gifts against the dark. You do your best to reach out tenderly to touch and elevate as many people as you can reach. You bring your naked love and defiant courage and salty grace to bear as much as you can, with all the attentiveness and humor you can muster. This life is, after all, a miracle, and we ought to pay fierce attention to every moment as much as possible. But you cannot control anything. You cannot order or command everything. You cannot fix and repair everything. You cannot protect your children from pain and loss and tragedy and illness. You cannot be sure you will always be married, let alone happily married. You cannot be sure you will always be employed or healthy or relatively sane. All you can do is face the world with quiet grace and hope you make a sliver of difference. Humility does not mean self-abnegation, lassitude, detachment. It's a more calm recognition that you must trust in what does not make sense, that which is unreasonable, illogical, silly, ridiculous, crazy by measure of most of our culture. You must trust that you being the best possible you matters somehow, that trying to be an honest and tender parent will echo for centuries through your tribe, that doing your chosen work with creativity and diligence will shiver people far beyond your kin, that being an attentive and generous friend and citizen will prevent a thread or two of social fabric from unraveling. And you must do all of this with the certain knowledge that you will never get proper credit for it. And in fact, the vast majority of things you do right will go utterly unremarked. Humility, the final frontier, as my brother Kevin used to say. When we are young, we build a self, a persona, a story in which to reside, or several selves in succession, or several at once. Sometimes when we are older, we take on other roles and personas, other masks and duties, and you and I both know men and women who become trapped in the selves they work so hard to build, so desperately in prison that sometimes they smash their lives simply to escape who they no longer wish to be. But finally, I think, if we are lucky, if we read the book of pain and loss and with humility, we realize that we are all broken and small and brief, and that none among us is ultimately more valuable or rich or famous or beautiful than another. And then perhaps we begin to understand something deep and true about humility. This is what I know, that the small is huge, the tiny is vast, that pain is part and parcel of the gift of joy, and that this is love. And then there is everything else. Either walk towards love or away from it with every breath you draw. Humility is the road to love. Humility maybe is love. That could be. I wouldn't know. I'm a muddle and a conundrum shuffling slowly along the road, gaping in wonder, trying to see and say what is, trying to leave shreds and shards of ego along the road like wisps of litter and chaff. All right, I'll leave you with that. And if you'd like any of those handouts or any of those things, you can email me there.